Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where we're following multiple developments surrounding the nationwide backlash over the Trump administration's deadly immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis, including from lawmakers on Capitol Hill, where a dispute over ICE funding could lead to a government shutdown tomorrow. That comes as White House border czar Tom Homan, who is now in charge of ICE operations in Minneapolis, is trying to turn down the temperature, acknowledging there are issues on the ground that need to be fixed. And as the president held a cabinet meeting today, but made no mention of Minnesota or his immigration enforcement operations. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was not among those cabinet members the president called on to speak. But the president did say he's working with Democrats to strike a deal to keep the government open, even as Democrats voted to block a package of government funding bills in protest of ICE tactics. Take a listen.
Hopefully we won't have a shutdown. And we're working on that right now. I think we're getting close. The Democrats, I don't believe, want to see it either. So we'll work in a very bipartisan way, I believe, not to have a shutdown. We don't want a shutdown.
Senate Democrats are demanding changes to DHS and ICE in the wake of the killing of Alex Pretti by a federal agent last weekend. Meanwhile, Tom Homan today saying he's working on a drawdown plan for the Border Patrol and ICE agents in Minneapolis and saying progress is being made.
Everybody I talked to agreed on was that community safety is paramount. One thing we all agreed on was U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement is a legitimate law enforcement agency that has a duty to enforce the laws enacted by Congress and keep this community safe. What we've been working on is making this operation safer, more efficient, by the book. The mission is going to improve because of the changes we're making it internally. We will conduct targeted enforcement operations. Targeted.
Homan also saying immigration operations will continue in the city and that a drawdown of federal forces will only happen if local authorities agree to cooperate with federal agents. Here he is talking about that.
We are not surrendering the president's mission on immigration enforcement. Let's make that clear. Prioritization of criminal aliens doesn't mean we forget about everybody else. That's just simply ridiculous. My main focus now is drawdown based upon the great conversations I've had with your state and local leaders. Again, I'm not a fool. I'm not walking away without seeing this put in place. But I take the word of the people I met with. I think they're honest, and I think they're good brokers, that they want public safety protected, and they also want what's happening in the city to go away.
Now, this all comes as new video has emerged. You see it here. This is of shooting victim Alex Pretti and a confrontation he had with federal officers 11 days before he was shot and killed by a Border Patrol agent. The video shows him kicking a vehicle and agents tackling him to the ground. Pretti's family confirming to NBC News they knew about this incident before he was killed. We, of course, do not know what happened before the start of this video. Joining me now is our team of reporters, NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander, NBC News Correspondent Camilla Bernal in Minneapolis, and NBC News Senior Homeland Security Correspondent Julia Ainsley. Peter, let me start with you at the White House. The president held his first cabinet meeting of the new year. What was your biggest takeaways? We didn't hear from Kristi Noem.
Yeah, Kristen, you're right. So this was the 10th cabinet meeting overall that the president has held since returning to the White House, as you note, the first one of this new year. Notably, only the second time in all the cabinet meetings that have been public, which is all of them but one, where Kristi Noem was not called on by the president to speak. It was particularly striking, an opportunity where he may have had to, in front of the cameras, with her alongside him, publicly praise her work, show his support for her. He has said that he stands by her right now and is happy with the way she has handled her job. But obviously she's facing a lot of blowback and a firestorm of criticism, not just from Democrats, but frankly from some Republicans as well, for her handling of the situation regarding ICE, specifically in Minneapolis in recent days. And what it tells me, the fact that she wasn't called on and the fact that this was significantly shorter, only about an hour and 20 minutes. You'll remember in a recent interview, the president said that those meetings needed to be quicker. They were, in his words, boring as hell. What it says is that the president really is doing all he can in his power to try to turn the page from this topic. As you and I have been discussing off air, the fact that the president is ultimately into optics. He recognizes the ways things play. He is a showman. He is a former reality TV Star, and he realizes that the headlines weren't in his favor. The images weren't reflecting well on him or his administration. So clearly he wanted as best possible to use this to pivot and to focus on other issues that he believes are top of mind for voters and for Americans right now, like the economy. He's going to be hosting an event on drug addiction this hour, and separately on progress, in his view, that's been made toward ending the war between Russia and Ukraine.
And let me ask you, Peter, just to follow up, you talk about the optics. Here we have Tom Homan, who was dispatched to the ground in Minneapolis, clearly aiming to turn down the temperature. It also comes as President Trump was talking about a potential deal with Democrats. Talk about the overall strategy right now. How significant is it for the White House to try to turn down the heat?
What's particularly notable about that possible deal with Democrats is that a lot of the deal is being done between Democrats and the White House, working directly with one another right now. The president, you played that soundbite from the cabinet meeting earlier, talking about this in ways that we don't often hear him speak, referring specifically to bipartisanship, a bipartisan effort, saying that in his conversations, he believes Democrats don't want there to be a shutdown either. So what it looks like we're going toward is a situation where instead of there being a partial shutdown that would take place as early as tomorrow night, if no agreement is reached by then, that there would be two separate bills in effect. One that would finish the spending bill as it related to all the agencies separate from DHS, and then a separate one on DHS specifically. So on the big agencies, that would kick the can down the road perhaps to September. On DHS, is it going to be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or 6 weeks, a smaller period of time to try to resolve that? And for Democrats, it's a point of leverage where there are really three separate issues they're focused on right now. Among them, trying to end these roving ICE patrols around the country right now. Separately, trying to create an updated code of conduct and accountability to deal with it. And finally, to try to have a situation where these ICE enforcement officers, where they are not wearing masks, they have ID on all of them, to try to change the policy as it relates to ICE going forward. Kristen.
Peter, breaking it all down for us at the White House. Thank you so much for that great reporting. We really appreciate it. Camilla Bernal, let me turn to you on the ground in Minneapolis. Tom Homan saying federal forces will not be pulled out of the city unless local authorities do a better job of cooperating with federal immigration agents. It also comes as Mayor Jacob Frey is in Washington today. Talk a little bit about what you are hearing from local leaders there on the ground in Minneapolis.
Yeah, Kristen, so it's interesting because the first thing that you hear from both the governor and the mayor here in Minneapolis is that they want federal agents out of the city. So that's sort of their first negotiating point from the very beginning. The governor had previously said that, yes, they do cooperate when it comes to state prisons, and they do essentially honor these ICE detainers, which is giving or turning over the people who have some sort of immigration detention or deportation order over to federal authorities. Jacob Frey has said, look, we will cooperate in criminal investigations, but we will not have our police officers essentially working or doing the job of federal agents. And that is part of what he reiterated today in D.C. Take a listen to what he said.
I will believe it when I see it. They have talked about drawing down the numbers in terms of federal agents, ICE, and Border Patrol in Minneapolis, and that is essential. The reality, however, is that we need Operation Metro Surge to end.
So they both want different things. The federal government wants one thing and state and local officials want another. So it really is unclear how they're going to get to an agreement at the end of the day. But again, local leaders here continue to say that what they want is the agents out of the city and really out of the state.
And you just hear Mayor Jacob Frey's defiance there, Camilla. Let me ask you about something else that Tom Homan said. He's promising changes when it comes to how these officers interact with the public. And he says that officers who don't act with professionalism, quote, will be dealt with. How were those comments met by the folks on the ground there in Minneapolis? Pretty strong statement.
They are, and I think everyone agrees that there should be some sort of de-escalation. And I will say that being on the ground here, when you don't have federal agents present, you don't see the violence that you saw maybe on Saturday after the shooting of Alex Pretti. Because when they are here, those confrontations get extremely tense. You know, I saw people going up to these federal agents, screaming at them and saying all sorts of really nasty things at them. So I do think once you get rid of the federal agents, you could see some de-escalation. So the question is, when will they actually go, and how are they going to get them to do this? Because Holman said he's going to stay here essentially until this is over. What exactly does that mean? We don't have clear answers to that. So it will be interesting to see how this all develops in terms of an agreement between all of them, Kristen.
Yeah, what exactly would that timeline look like? Camilla Bernal, excellent reporting from a frigid Minneapolis. Thank you for braving the temps for us. We really appreciate it. I want to turn to Julia Ainsley now. So, Julia, you heard Tom Homan talk about these targeted operations. Give us a little bit more information. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it's what Tom Homan's been calling for the past year, Kristen. He wants to go after the worst of the worst. He wants ICE officers to be able to walk into a community with a list of people who are tied to crimes that they've been convicted of. And we saw a reversal of that policy starting in June when Greg Bovino was leading the charge in L.A. And it was around that time ICE discontinued a policy they used to have where officers used to have to fill out worksheets before they made arrest on who the person was. Now, because they had so little information about the people they were arresting, the worksheets were being left blank. And so they did away with those. We've reported on those last fall. But it just underscores the point that he wants to return to a day where ICE did their homework, where they knew who it was who they were arresting. And he's not leaving out the possibility that some people could be swept up if they're in the area, if they're around someone. Say you go into a place with a warrant and you find other people who have broken immigration law. He's always said that that's on the table, but it's his priority to go after criminals because he thinks at the end of the day, that's what ICE is there for. And he thinks that's going to be a better move politically, both with the electorate around the country and with how they cooperate with Minnesota.
It was so clear based on his tone
that
he understood the enormity of this moment, and that as you say, to some extent, it's about calming the tensions that exist. Let me ask you about the fact that we are actually seeing some changes take place in Maine. What are you tracking there?
Yeah, that's right. We heard from Senator Susan Collins and other government officials from the state of Maine that said that ICE has informed them that they will be pulling out. They started in Lewiston, Maine. And when I say present, ICE has 25 field offices around the country, but they surged more people in. And that had been one area right north of Portland, Maine, where they had started to surge more ICE officers. Now we understand, and Susan Collins said she had multiple conversations asking Kristi Noem to do this, that she's agreed to bring them back. So what a week for Kristi Noem. I mean, she's having to scale back on these plans. She had been so aggressive up until Saturday, and now she's not being called on, as Peter pointed out at the White House press conference. It seems that she's really having to do a 180 here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're getting this new video of Alex Pretti. What are your sources telling you, Julia, about what this video shows us, and what's the reaction been?
Well, I think the idea is that there's a concern, especially from the family, that that video could be weaponized against Pretti and make people believe that somehow what happened to him on Saturday was deserved because he was an agitator. From what we saw on Saturday, there was nowhere near that kind of behavior. We don't see what happens at the beginning of this video. And even still, even with that altercation, that does not mean, obviously, that he deserved to be killed in an unlawful fatal shooting if the investigation determines that it was. The other thing is that when I went to DHS about this incident, they said they had no records of it. So whatever happened here was not recorded, and we don't believe that it ended in any kind of charge.
Interesting. All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for helping to start us off once again. We really appreciate it. We want to turn now to Capitol Hill, where, as we said, the government is on the verge of a partial shutdown over new demands from Democrats to address the Trump administration's immigration crackdown following the deaths of Alex Pretti and Renee Nicole Good. Today, a key procedural vote to advance a package of 6 appropriations bills failed in the Senate, with all the Democrats and 8 Republicans voting against it. But there may be a deal in the works between Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and the White House. Joining me now is NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. So, Sahil, what is the status of these talks? How close are they to a potential deal?
Hey, Kristen. Well, first off, that Senate vote you mentioned is crucial because the margin of defeat was pretty jarring, 45 to 55. That's 45 in favor, nowhere close to the 60 that they need. Not a single Democrat voted for this package, and 7 Senate Republicans joined Democrats in opposition. So what does that mean? It means Democrats have leverage to press some real demands here because Republicans are nowhere close to the votes without them. Let's take a look at those 3 core demands that Senator Schumer is voicing on behalf of Democrats. There are many of them, but these are the ones the party is unified behind. Ending roving patrols, that's where people are stopped on suspicion of immigration violations, and tighten the rules requiring warrants for arrests. Create a uniform code of conduct that officers have to abide by, and require agents to take off their masks, to carry ID, and wear body cameras when they conduct operations. Now, the near term, Kristen, is complicated because the deadline is tomorrow at midnight, and they still have to pass something and get it signed by President Trump to prevent a shutdown. What there is agreement on is 5 out of the 6 appropriations bills that'll fund about 80% of the government, with the exception of DHS, and they're negotiating right now a short-term funding bill to punt DHS, to keep that open on autopilot for 2 weeks. That's what the Democrats want. Republicans want it a little bit longer, but that's where the negotiations seem centered on. And once that gets done, once they get a deal, if they do, it could move through the Senate very quickly, especially because today is Thursday, tomorrow is the deadline, and many senators candidly want to go home.
Absolutely. How are Senate Republicans reacting to Democrats' proposed reforms, Sahil?
They're mostly sticking close to President Trump. I think the vibes here are extremely different than the vibes around the previous record-long government shutdown instigated by Democrats over funding for the Affordable Care Act, where Republicans essentially told Democrats to pound sand, that they were not going to talk, they were not going to negotiate. This time, Republicans are really spooked by video of an American citizen getting gunned down by someone in their own government, someone who works for their own government, rather, in broad daylight. So Senate Republicans are deferring to the White House and Democrats to cut a deal here, and the Majority Leader John Thune has indicated that he would be in favor of a deal. Not everyone is on board, though. Take a listen to a couple of Republicans on how they're responding.
I think Democrats are wanting some reforms that make sense to me. Body cameras, making ICE more like other agencies. But that's a Band-Aid. To my Democratic friends, I think you have some good ideas. I think the ultimate idea is to end sanctuary city policy is hurting our nation.
Now this idea that we're going to go forward and not support ICE and not fund ICE is the craziest thing in the world. So this idea that we're going to separate out now not going to fund ICE is the most foolish thing I can ever hear of.
Quite remarkable, Kristen, to hear Senator Lindsey Graham say Democrats have some good ideas here that he's willing to take into consideration. I think Senator Scott, who you just heard there, is in the minority among Republicans. If a deal does come together, I expect it to pass with a vast bulk of Republican support.
All right. Well, fast-moving developments there on Capitol Hill. Sahil, thank you for bringing us up to speed on all of them. Great to see you, as always. Coming up, a Senate Democrat responds to the Trump administration's apparent attempts to de-escalate tensions and change tactics in Minnesota as the White House and Congress rush to avert a partial government shutdown. Senator Tammy Baldwin is standing by. We'll talk to her next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Joining me now is Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin. Thank you so much for joining me, Senator. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Before we dive into everything in the potential government shutdown, I just want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about Alex Pretti. He grew up in Wisconsin, in your state. You're hearing from your constituents about him, Senator?
Absolutely. He was a graduate of Preble High School in Green Bay, and I've heard from classmates who talked about what a role model he was, even as a peer, how kind he was. Earlier today, I spoke on the phone with his drama teacher and how responsible, he had attention to detail, but just how kind he was. And, you know, in his role as an ICU nurse at the VA hospital in Minneapolis, which, by the way, serves veterans from Western Wisconsin, I also heard how grateful people were to his kindness and compassion. And so it's such a tragic loss. And, you know, his last act was trying to protect a woman who was shoved into a snowbank. It just speaks to, how kind he was. And he should be still alive.
Yeah, Senator, I want to get your reaction to what we are seeing on the ground in Minneapolis, the very latest in the wake of that horrific killing over the weekend. The White House has dispatched Tom Homan. He is now on the ground. He, of course, held that news conference earlier today in which he seemed to try to tamp down the tensions. He urged state and local officials to work with federal officials and said there will be a drawdown if that happens. What was your reaction? Did you hear from Tom Homan what you think would amount to lowering the tensions right now, Senator?
I did not hear from Tom Homan about the type of accountability measures that we are demanding get attached to the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. We need to see a situation where this agency is no longer acting like a rogue agency. They need to take those masks off. They need to put body cameras on. They need to show identification. They can no longer be running around in unmarked cars. They need to subscribe to a code of conduct and accountability like any local or state law enforcement agency would. And they also need to stop these roving patrols that go around neighborhoods knocking at doors. They need to act according to warrants. They need to have somebody that they are going after a target, and they need to cooperate with local officials in terms of executing those warrants. Trump told us that he wanted to go after dangerous criminals who were undocumented. And he had the American public's support in doing that, but he does not have the American public's support in doing what he's doing in Minnesota and many other communities across this country right now.
Senator, let me ask you about what Democrats are demanding. You laid out a long list. As far as I can tell, Leader Schumer has 3 key reforms that he is demanding, including ending roving patrols, as you say, enforcing a uniform code of conduct, and requiring agents to remove masks and wear body cameras. A lot of what you just talked about. Is that enough for you to then vote for the DHS funding bill if those changes were to be included?
Look, those are the areas that we have to be concerned with. This is a rogue agency that needs to be reined in. And if this agency was acting like any local or state law enforcement agency, we might have some trust. But until they take those masks off and put body cameras on, wear identification, until they stop lurking around schools and daycares and churches and in our residential neighborhoods, there is not going to be that type of trust. So we absolutely demand and need these accountability measures to be attached to their funding before we can move on.
And where does the deal stand? Do you get the sense that a deal is close? Where do you put the chances of a government shutdown right now, Senator?
It's really up to my Republican colleagues. What I understand within the last couple of hours is that there has been an agreement to take the Department of Homeland Security appropriation bills out of the package of other funding bills to be able to pass the remaining 5 bills and then negotiate the accountability measures that I've just been describing in short order, so we can move ahead there. I think if there are discrepancies right now, it might be how quickly we can negotiate our demands. And I think we can do it very quickly. I'm here to stay over the weekend if necessary, but I believe that we need to get accountability in place very expeditiously.
And what you're mapping out, is that being negotiated between Leader Schumer and the White House? And how do you assess Leader Schumer's leadership in this moment? He's, of course, come under scrutiny for the past government shutdown.
Look, I think right now this is all in the Republicans. It's a matter of their responsibility. They can either give a blank check to ICE and the Department of Homeland Security, or they can join with us to demand what the American people are overwhelmingly demanding right now.
But do you think Leader Schumer is showing strong leadership? Do you think Leader Schumer is showing strong leadership?
Absolutely. And I think the only question is when my Republican colleagues will agree to these measures.
You have called on DHS Secretary Kristi Noem to resign immediately. What happens if she doesn't? There's, of course, talk about potentially impeaching her in the House, but how do you see accountability in this moment?
You know, an agency that she oversees has killed 2 American citizens in the last month. And she is overseeing an agency that has gone lawless, gone rogue. But what's really additionally problematic to so many of my colleagues, and certainly the family and friends of Alex Pretti, is that she has lied to the American public. She called him an assassin. She called him a domestic terrorist. And she has changed the narrative, if you will, to fit her idea of what she wants the American public to believe. It is not acceptable for a cabinet secretary to lie to the American people, and she needs to go. She needs to resign. Trump needs to fire her. And if those are bases for impeachment that I just described, I don't know what is.
Some of your colleagues are calling for ICE to be abolished. I wonder, Senator, if you would go that far. Do you think ICE actually needs to be abolished?
Look, we have immigration laws. And if we return to what Donald Trump said he wanted to do with immigration enforcement, which is to go after hardened, violent criminals, I think we would have the entire American public support for this. But this agency has gone rogue. This agency is breaking the law. This agency is killing U.S. citizens, doing these roving patrols, going door to door without warrants. That is not America, and we cannot allow that to go on. And that's why we are demanding the reforms that I've described.
So you're saying you want to see ICE reformed, but not necessarily abolished? Is that what I hear you saying, Senator?
That's correct. We have immigration laws that need enforcing. But this agency right now has gone rogue, and that is not what they're doing.
All right. Senator Tammy Baldwin, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a very busy day on the Hill. We really appreciate your time and your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up next, search and seizure. What we know and still don't know about an FBI operation targeting 2020 election records at a key Fulton County office in Georgia as local officials sound the alarm. That new reporting coming up next on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Fulton County officials are speaking out after the FBI raided an election office yesterday seeking records related to the 2020 election, which President Trump falsely claims was rigged and stolen. Fulton County Commissioner Rob Pitts telling reporters today that the FBI took about 700 boxes of documents during yesterday's search. Pitt also says he doesn't know where those documents are or who has them, and that his office can no longer be held responsible for those ballots. A senior Trump administration official, meanwhile, tells NBC News Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard was in Fulton County yesterday and visited that election center. Now, the top Democrats on the House and Senate Intelligence Committees are demanding answers from Gabbard about her presence in Fulton County. Here's what Senator Warner had to say earlier today.
This is Director of National Intelligence that is affirmatively moved to cut back the Foreign Malign Influence Center on elections. What the heck is she doing on the FBI serving a domestic warrant? You know, if this doesn't concern the heck out of every American, it sure as hell should.
Joining me now is NBC News senior justice reporter Ryan Riley. Ryan, thank you for being here. This is a bizarre one. What's the latest that we know about what the FBI was doing in Fulton County?
Well, it's certainly an oddity. We know from the search warrant itself that this was about these records. They got a ton of these records dating back until October of 2020, which is unique in itself because you got to remember the statute of limitations for most federal crimes is 5 years. So this falls outside of that. And then the question is, what was the criminal conspiracy that continued allegedly within that 5-year realm? It did pass this search warrant, went through a magistrate judge. So a magistrate judge looked at this. Those are normally pretty just standard sign-off scenarios. It's very rare for a magistrate judge to reject a search warrant application. But another oddity is that there was a U.S. attorney who was not in the district, who was actually from Missouri, who was on this case as well. So there's just a number of red flags, I think, that are going up for people about this sort of search.
Well, another potential red flag, NBC News has learned that the FBI Atlanta field office's special agent in charge was forced to retire. What do you know about that?
Yeah, precisely. I mean, what we know that he was forced out. Often in these cases, and we've seen a lot of people who found their red line or were forced to do something that they ethically disagreed with, who have departed the Justice Department in recent days. And often we find that they don't come out and say publicly what exactly that was, because they still abide by that justice manual that talks about not talking about ongoing cases. Even though they're no longer on the payroll, they still abide by those rules. So often it takes a little bit of work to figure out what exactly is going on there, and they're not going to come out with a statement and say, I was forced out because of this ongoing investigation, because under the rules they're really not supposed to talk about these ongoing investigations.
Talk a little bit about what Senator Warren was criticizing, the fact that Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard was in Fulton County. He said that should really send a shockwave for all Americans. Why is he saying that, and what is so unique about the fact that she would be there?
You just don't see someone in her position in this position to begin with. I mean, one of the first rules of any prosecution is you don't make yourself a witness in the case. And so now Tulsi Gabbard could be a witness called in any future case, right? So her presence there, they can, down the line, were this to get to a defense point, that's what you would worry about. And the other thing is, you're creating all of these problems for any theoretical future case because you're creating this appearance that this is politically motivated. The idea that she's flying down there and overseeing these ballots when this has been, Donald Trump's obsession and this has been what he's been targeted her at is just going to, if this were to ever get to a prosecution, would give a defense attorney a really great motion to say this was a vindictive sort of prosecution.
All right, Ryan Riley, as always, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Coming up after the break, Finding Common Ground, a bipartisan group of mayors responds to the situation in Minneapolis, plus how they're working across the aisle to solve problems in their cities and around the country. Stay with us on Meet the Press now.
We are on the front lines of a very important battle. And it's important that we aren't silenced, that we aren't put down. This is not a time to bend our heads in despair or out of fear that we may be next, because if we do not speak up, if we do not step out, it will be your city that is next.
That was Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who, as we mentioned earlier, is in Washington, D.C. today, where he addressed the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Yesterday, in the latest installment of our Finding Common Ground series, I spoke with a bipartisan pair of mayors about the current tensions in Minneapolis and the many challenges facing mayors all across the country. Joining me now is Republican Mayor David Holt of Oklahoma City and President of the Conference of Mayors, and Democratic Mayor Todd Gloria of San Diego and Vice President of the Conference of Mayors. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Well, a lot to get to. I do want to start with this crisis that we're seeing in Minneapolis. And Mayor Holt, I want to ask you about this statement that the Conference of Mayors put out. You write, quote, the nation's mayors call for immediate intervention by national leaders to de-escalate the situation in Minnesota. This is not a partisan issue. It is an issue of national concern. Are you satisfied at this very moment, as we sit here, that national leaders are doing enough to de-escalate the crisis?
Well, interesting question. And so we put that out, of course, Saturday, right after the second death of a resident in Minneapolis. And, with the input of Democrats and Republicans and independents, as well as mayors in the Minnesota delegation. So I think we're cautiously encouraged that, there seems to be some personnel changes. There seems to be reporting, we're not necessarily privy to the inner workings of the White House, but we're reading the news reports like everybody else that seem to imply there's a pivot happening. And yeah, so I think we need to remain vigilant, but it is certainly our position that what was happening in Minneapolis was unacceptable. And what was great was when our statement went out, it seemed like there were similar statements kind of from all kinds of organizations and all kinds of elected officials across the partisan spectrum. Yeah. And it became really a chorus that was organic and not, not anything that anyone was collaborating on. Because it was just common sense that this had become absolutely unacceptable.
Mayor Gloria, pick up on that point, if you would. You talk about some of the personnel changes. Of course, President Trump did send Tom Homan to be in charge of everything that's happening in Minneapolis. What do you make of that move? Do you think it will help to de-escalate tensions there?
Well, it does provide a milestone that, maybe makes space for some change, which is obviously necessary. President Holt and I have had an opportunity to meet with Mayor Fry from Minnesota, and it's clear that something has to happen, and if that helps to move things along, great. But from what we hear from our colleagues from Minnesota is that the conditions continue to be extremely dire, and it seemingly is worse than what we kind of get from the media. And as a consequence, more will need to come. But as President Holt mentioned, there's at least an indication of a shift coming, and that should be encouraging. But we can't be satisfied until we get back to some level of law and order that we come to expect on our streets.
Yeah, we need action, and we need things on the ground to change, not just the right things being said in Washington, but. It's okay. We can give it a little bit of time, but
you take me to my next question, which is about the leadership that we're seeing in Minneapolis. You talked about Mayor Fry. Mayor Gloria, what do you make of his leadership in this moment? We've seen some really tense comments, both from Mayor Fry, of course, from the administration, the president. What do you make of Mayor Fry's leadership right now?
Well, I know him, and I know him to be a very even-keeled and very thoughtful leader. And so that first initial statement, that he got some criticism for. But what I know from my job is that we're often in the position of being the personification of the city, to be the voice of your residents. And what is evident is that there's tremendous emotion, lots of fear. And I think he was emoting that. And by doing so, I think that helps to actually let the populace know that their mayor understands and is feeling what they're feeling and expressing that on their behalf. I hope that provides some level of reassurance to the populace that needs that right now. He's a very good leader, and I think he's doing the best he can under very difficult circumstances. I'd say the same for his police chief.
Mayor Holt, I want to talk a little bigger picture now about both of your communities. One of the biggest issues facing all Americans coast to coast, the issue of affordability and the economy. It's obviously been a top issue on the campaign trail. It's going to be front and center in 2026 in the midterms. How do you see your role as mayor? Are there things that you can do, actionable items that you can tackle to address that issue for your constituents?
Well, quite possibly. And, I think like different cities and different states might come at this from a slightly different ideological perspective and have different solutions, but we all sort of have an idea. And so coming from a place like Oklahoma and Oklahoma City, I think we think of it in terms, first of all, housing, which is the largest single cost in anyone's life. What can we do to address that? And of course, that's our number one issue here in Washington as mayors, but we're also doing things on the local level to work towards that. And of course, we work towards, higher paying jobs. We have a whole economic development team. That's what mayors and cities often do, are out there recruiting higher paying jobs to raise the median income in our city. So I think that's how probably a mayor of Oklahoma City looks at the affordability issue. Different cities may come at it from a different angle, but I think the biggest thing for me right now is what can we do both at the local and national level on housing?
Mayor Gloria, how do you see it?
I couldn't agree more about the housing piece. We talk understandably about gas prices and grocery prices, but it is housing that I hear the most from my constituents about. And this is often from people who have good jobs and are working extremely hard, but don't see a future for themselves in my city. As a mayor, I control permitting, I control zoning, and when I can create more opportunities for people to live in a housing they can actually afford, that is tackling the affordability crisis. In my city, we've gone from an average of about 4,400 new home permits per year for the last 2 decades. We're knocking on about 10,000 a year, and that increase in production is driving down costs.
And just finally, to both of you, what is your message to lawmakers here in Washington about how they might better reach across the aisle to work together, particularly in this moment where the country is incredibly divided?
Well, I think we do have a little bit of something to say about that. We're living it right here. I mean, we work together in our cities, within our cities. No city is a monolith in terms of its ideology, right? We both have, he's got Republicans in his city, I've got Democrats at mine, and we work with them, and then we work together amongst ourselves as mayors. We've got Republicans, Democrats, and independents in our organization, and when you go to the press conference where we all talk, you probably couldn't even figure out who was who. And I kind of think that's the way it should be. And I will tell you, too much to get into on the air, but I'm telling your viewers, go Google the Oklahoma City Declaration, which over 230 mayors have signed, that talks about the basic behaviors that people in our positions need to be engaged in and how we embrace compromise and pluralism. That's what people up here could learn from us. I love talking about the issues, but I think we need to talk just as much about how we do things, and we do things right as mayors.
Well, I think a lot of people agree with you, Mayor Gloria. What is your message to that point?
Well, I love working in a bipartisan fashion. We definitely need that. And I think why mayors do that better than perhaps others is that we can't allow partisanship to be an excuse for not getting something done. The garbage got picked up this week or it didn't. Water came to your house or did not. Someone got to your door when you called 911 or they didn't. We can't allow party to be the excuse for why we don't see progress. It doesn't work for mayors. I don't think it works at the state or national level either. And we can't allow it to be an excuse. We've got to get stuff done for the people of this country.
All right. Mayor Gloria and Mayor Holt, thank you both so much for a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen.
And still to come, it's official. Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar is running for governor of Minnesota, calling for unity and decrying the killings of Alex Pretti and Renee Good in her official campaign launch. The panel responds next on Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. Joining me now is the panel. Shelby Talcott, White House correspondent for Semaphore. Amisha Cross, Democratic strategist and former Obama campaign advisor. And Annalise Keller, Republican strategist and former communications director for now former Republican Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado. Thanks to all of you for being here. Let's start with what's happening, Shelby, on the ground in Minnesota. You have Tom Homan there, clearly trying to lower tensions. What do you make of this moment in Minneapolis, and is it a sign that the White House believes they've got a real problem on their hands?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to administration officials and people close to the White House over the past few days, and they've acknowledged privately that this is something that has become an issue. We've heard that the president has been on calls pretty much all week, all over the weekend, trying to field the situation. He watches a lot of TV. He has seen the video footage. He is uncomfortable with that video footage. And so it's become really clear with the changes that they've made by sending Tom Homan out there, who is very close to Donald Trump, very trusted by the president, and then effectively sidelining Kristi Noem and Greg Bovino. Those are big changes for this administration to make. And the announcement that we heard from Tom Homan earlier today, where he said essentially that they're going to be drawing down CBP operations and ICE operations in the state and sort of limiting things, is a really big concession that we haven't seen the administration make at all over the past year.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's so rare to see the president acknowledge mistakes. Amisha, it's notable. We've seen this new song released by Bruce Springsteen, and I raise it because it speaks to the fact that this is really resonating beyond the political world. This is something that has had implications for people all across this country. What do you make of the fact that this figure, who is a well-known Democrat, outspoken, would get involved in this moment?
Well, I'd probably say it's about time, recognizing that ICE has essentially been amplifying its efforts for quite some time now. I'm a native Chicagoan. I remember the raid that they did in the middle of the night over an apartment building that I used to live in, where they zip-tied children. I think that we have to be very serious that as long as they were basically given the green light to continue and then heard from the president that essentially they had immunity, they were going to continue. The entertainment world has now jumped on. Several people across the entertainment world. And part of that is because they have a different audience than your embedded political audience. So I think that it matters that they're speaking out. In addition to that, we know that there are some people who are even MAGA and MAGA adjacent who had significant problems with the most recent murder because of the 2A aspect of things. So I do think that this one is a little bit different than some of the previous cases that we've seen. But I'm glad that people are now sheerly activated.
Annalise, what do you make of the fact that these prominent voices in the entertainment world are speaking out about this again, to this question of how much has this moment resonated and how much could that be a political problem for the Trump administration?
I mean, we've all kind of been locked inside. I think everyone's seen this video and everyone's sitting around with these snowstorms across the country. And this has really resonated with people. And I think it does show, I totally agree, Shelby. I think the Trump administration has gotten as close to an apology or an admittance that this is a really big problem for Republicans as maybe they're ever going to get with the actions of sidelining Secretary Noem and putting in Homan. The other thing that stood out to me was a big flaring sign in Congress is Schumer is negotiating directly with Donald Trump right now to stop the DHS, or excuse me, pull apart DHS funding from the funding bills package that is moving through Congress right now. There's about 6 of them. DHS is one of them. And last time when we had the shutdown, Donald Trump was completely silent, and that's because he wanted Republicans to work it out. He knew that there was leverage on the Republican side. And so this is the biggest signal to me that Trump knows that the narrative is not in Republicans' favor right now. And Republicans in the Senate are totally getting rolled by Donald Trump right now.
What do you make of that, Amisha?
No, I think that's 100% factual. At the end of the day, this one is very different in large part because Trump is getting those calls, and he's getting those calls from people he respects. He's getting them from Fox News hosts. He's getting them from his MAGA coalition base members. He's getting them from people who normally would not even respond in these cases. But I think that, again, this case is centralized in a way that it has not shaken down in any of the other cases where ICE has elicited, use of force. And in large part, this president knows that no matter what he does, he cannot move the media away from this conversation because he can't move people away from this conversation. We know that now the date has been set for the next No Kings rallies, March 28th. There's investigations that are going to be in play, specifically around the officer whose name we still do not know, who actually shot and killed this man. In addition to that, I think that the tide has changed because it's not just Democrats or moderates calling. There are also conservatives calling for this as well. That is not a place we were just a few weeks ago.
Shelby, where do you put the chances of a government shutdown based on your conversation if you had to look into your crystal ball?
I still think it's moderate chances of a partial shutdown, but I do think it's really, really notable that the president is willing to negotiate with Democrats right now.
Very different than last time.
What I will also say is I talked to a senior White House official just a day or two ago about the funding bill and the White House's stance. They've been pretty quiet about it, but from my understanding, their argument is they're frustrated with Democrats because this was a bipartisan bill, and their argument is we can't do this. We can't kind of change the game 2 days before, 48 hours before the government's supposed to shut down, which I think is a fair argument. But this person also said that the administration has made those changes with Minneapolis, and there are more changes that could potentially be made. And to me, that signals that the Trump administration is recognizing again how big of a deal this DHS issue is for them. And they really want to find a solution, which is, as you said, really different from the first government shutdown. And so maybe that ends up, we have at 11 o'clock tonight, we end up having a deal. Who knows?
Well, one of the other aspects and things that makes Minneapolis interesting right now, there's a gubernatorial race. Senator Amy Klobuchar officially announced she's running. I want to play a little bit of her announcement video today. Look.
These times call for leaders who can stand up and not be rubber stamps of this administration, but who are also willing to find common ground and fix things in our state. These times call for grit and resilience.
Amisha, what do you make of that message? Is it a winning message for Amy Klobuchar and for Democrats more broadly in the midterms?
Absolutely. I think that right now, obviously, affordability is still at the top of people's minds, but when they're watching, inundated with all of the videos that have recently come out about what's happening in Minneapolis, Klobuchar couldn't have announced her running for this level of office at any better time, honestly, and she's probably going to clear the field.
Okay, bold projection there. Annalise, what do you make? Do Republicans have a chance in Minnesota? What do you think?
She's certainly the favorite. I don't think there are a lot of Republicans sitting around thinking there's a lot of chances here. But what I would say is something that she would be wise to do is she's a former prosecutor. She should start talking about some of the fraud that people are legitimately concerned about in the state and talk about how she's going to take that on. Because I actually think with her background, she could sort of neutralize that challenge that would be coming from the right, which I think is going to be kind of her Achilles heel.
Yeah, what do you make of her launching, the timing of it, the impact of it?
I think my question is, this is a really smart launch by focusing on the ICE operations right now. My question is it going to be as relevant as we continue on closer to the race, or is she going to shift back to the economy? Say if this sort of dies down over the next few months, is she going to have to kind of shift her focus? The other point I'll make is that this is not a Democrat who has been particularly cozy with the president. And so should she win, it's going to pose issues with the president and the White House working with Minnesota.
For sure. All fantastic points. Great conversation. Shelby, Amisha, and Annalise, really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. We're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. There's more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.